everybody. Before we jump into today's episode, we have two sponsors we want to say thank you to for supporting this show. The first one is Routine. You guys have heard me talk about Routine, honestly, back from the early days of the podcast, and it's still a product I use every single morning. They have a prompt for me here. I'm going to do a little impromptu on this ad read today because honestly, this is a product that I truly believe in. And so I'm just going to tell you guys exactly what I think and why. First and foremost, this is a stat that they shared, but when you sleep, you lose between a pound and a pound and a half of water. And most of that's just sweating while you sleep. I used to not know if that was actually true, to be honest. I felt like a pound to a pound and a half of water seemed like quite a bit while I slept. But the one thing I did constantly pay attention to when I started using Routine was just the fact that before using Routine, I always felt a little dehydrated in the morning. And I'm one of those people that when I get up really early usually. I work out. One of the first things I do is some form of fitness. It's just like what I do before everyone's awake. And so it's very easy for me to grab a coffee, pre-workout, an energy drink, something with caffeine in it, and just go. When I am good about using Routine, first, I basically they come in these little single serve packets. They contain half an organic lemon, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, Himalayan sea salt, all 6 essential electrolytes, and they have no sugar in them at all. A lot of hydration products are going to have sugar. So one of the things about Routine that I love is that there's no sugar in there. So when I am good about doing this consistently, I will take one of those single serve packets, I'll throw it in my mixer bottle, and whether I also put in a pre-workout or something with caffeine or I just drink that separately, I try to drink that first. And the days I do that, I do genuinely feel hydrated and just have a different form of clarity all morning. A lot of people have tried to make their own homemade versions of Routine, right? You see people they take a shot of the apple cider vinegar, they put a little sea salt, a little lemon in a drink. This is essentially that, but in a product that you can take with you on the go, have it ready for you first thing in the morning. I know me personally, when I'm groggy rolling out of bed, the last thing I want to do is, squeeze a lemon, cut lemons up, go get the apple cider vinegar, find my sea salt. I just rip this packet open, throw it in my water, drink it, and it's good to go. You can try yours today. If you haven't tried it yet and you've been listening to this podcast for years, just try the damn Routine. Give it a shot. You can use code ShaneWhite30 and get 30% off your first order. So you get 30% off by using code ShaneWhite30 and go to yourroutine.com. To make it even easier, I've added the link to yourroutine.com in the show notes. So just click on the show notes for this episode, click on the link to yourroutine.com, and don't forget to use code ShaneWhite30. All right, guys, today's episode is also brought to you by NeuroRoast. Again, I'm going to go a little off script here. NeuroRoast is a product that I also came across during this year of 2023. They are a coffee company that's helping you optimize your brain function and overall well-being. This is another product that, to be honest with you, when I first started working with it, I was a little on the fence. I was like, do I really want to have mushrooms in my coffee? Well, folks, I will tell you, when I use NeuroRoast, one of the things that has stood out to me the most is I'll back up. People that know me know that I have way too much caffeine, typically. One of the things this year I've done a good job of is cutting out alcohol. Not completely, but predominantly, I don't touch a lot of alcohol anymore. What I think I've actually done the other way, though, is add a lot more caffeine. So I do definitely drink too much caffeine. That's something I need to work on next year, is just trying to minimize how much of that. But NeuroRoast is something that has actually helped me because of the way they've formulated their coffee. Like, unlike regular coffee, which is still something I consume, but NeuroRoast specifically doesn't cause jitters or crashes. Mushroom coffee provides a more balanced and sustained energy, allowing you to stay focused and productive throughout the day. So the times I do use NeuroRoast, I'll be honest, I just don't feel that jittery, like, I'm jumping out of my chair or standing here at my desk jumping around feeling. So give NeuroRoast a try. They have some really good flavors. I'll be honest too, the two guys that started NeuroRoast are just really good dudes based out of New York, and they're hustling, and hopefully they can get some people to try NeuroRoast this holiday season by listening to this podcast. So for you folks who've been on the fence, I'm telling you, it tastes delicious. They've done a fantastic job of making this coffee not only be functional, but taste fantastic. And if you want to try NeuroRoast, you can use code ShaneWhite. So it's super simple, just ShaneWhite at checkout. you'll also get 30% off. So if you go to neuroroast.com, and once again, I have added that to the show notes. So just click into the show notes while you're listening to this episode. You can click on NeuroRoast link directly. Don't forget to use code just Shane White, and you'll get 30% off your order. Hope you guys love both these products. I'm trying to not only bring you guys products that I use, but that I believe in on the podcast. I'm not taking ad reads for any brands that I don't really believe in. So anyway, hope you guys love both those products, yourroutine.com and neuroroast.com. I've added those links to the show notes. Hope you guys love it. And I got an awesome guest coming up right after this. All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Shane White Show. I am pumped today. I got two gentlemen on the podcast that I've been fired up to talk about their new venture, Integral CPG. We're going to dive into today. Glenn and Rifle, welcome to the show. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on. How you guys doing?
Great. Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. For everyone who doesn't know who you both are, would you mind just giving a quick intro to you and the brand?
Sure. I'll handle me and the Integral business, and I'll let Rifle speak to himself. Glenn Pappalardo, one of the co-founders of Integral CPG, a brand new, couple weeks old consultancy specializing in innovation, or what we refer to as ambitious innovation in the food and beverage space. Shane and I had the pleasure of working together at RX Bar many moons ago now. It's quickly receding into the rearview mirror, sadly.
But kind of crazy how long it's actually been since we were both in that office together. I think about it all the time, looking at the calendar. I'm like, how's it 2024? What happened?
Oh yeah, and then you walk by now, a different sign up front. It's just all Foxtrot's closed across the street.
Yeah, no joke. Yeah, who could have forecasted that?
Too much. Yeah, so long career in both consulting, strategy consulting, innovation, and also the food and beverage industry. A little touch of international in there as well. So that's how I got here, and part of that journey introduced me to Rifle at our former company. And that's how we got to know each other and jump out on this crazy adventure that we're embarking upon. So I'll let Rifle give his quick background.
Yeah, again, Shane, thanks for having me here. Been in the industry in some way for about 15 plus years, about 25 years into my career. Started out in a little bit more of the technology side in telecommunications. Was born and raised in Texas. I'm one of the few Texans that's like, I kind of went out of here.
I was going to say that doesn't happen often.
Place. So, my first job was going over to Europe and doing global market entry after the EU was formed and deregulation was happening in the telecommunications space. So, sort of set me on my journey because I was in the middle of a lot of experienced people with deep functional backgrounds, and I started to evolve into this place where I'm someone that just soaks up everything that other people are doing and see the connections and put it together. Glenn's that way too, which is it's set us on our path. Ultimately ended up doing consulting on my own after a decade or so, and found my way into CPG. And my first more meaningful stuff there was as managing director at an amazing brand strategy and packaging design firm out of the Bay Area called McLean Design. Their most notable success was the creation of the Monster Energy brand. You may have seen it. And, an amazing team, small boutique, but a lot of times packaging design is very tactical. And where I was able to even hone myself more there is design is ultimately an expression of a strategy in communication. And that's where what we practice there. And then it led me here formally to JPG, which is a food innovation consultancy primarily centered on its origins in research and development, helping brands create food and beverage products. And I was brought on to help build out a front-end strategy team. Glenn joined a year or so later, and we spent 5 or so years building that out and helping brands determine where they were going to go and why, and then helping them execute by creating those products. And so just a multi-decade journey to now start our own venture and see if we can upgrade the food and beverage industry to an even higher level of ambitious innovation.
I love that. Thank you both for giving that background. For me, it was cool when I saw Glenn's post that you guys were doing this because, I don't know, Glenn, you and I have had a couple conversations. We've met over coffee. And
Yeah.
I could sense even then, you were fired up about JPG for sure, but I don't know. I had this sense of like I know Glenn obviously better than Rifle. Glenn's had quite the career, and I'll dive into a little bit of it with my interaction with him at our X Bar. But what was wild with Glenn from the start, he always was like this he always had these corporate roles, like in my interactions, but I always had this sense of he was like really an entrepreneur. It was funny. And I don't run across that very often, where you have someone in a W-2 job maybe who you can tell you're like, they're not going to be in W-2 forever. They're going to probably need to break out and do something. And then even Glenn, I think like a year ago when we had coffee, or not even a year ago, I could definitely sense. I'm like, he's meant to go build some stuff. So I'm pumped for you guys.
It took 23 years, right? So like It was an overnight process to become an entrepreneur.
You know what's funny though, Glenn, that you say that? I probably was someone growing up where I didn't necessarily know what entrepreneurship was, but I always thought I wanted to do something on my own. That was always something I would say, but I really didn't know what that meant. And then you see all these people who try to just like start with that. And I would argue the longer I've been alive and the longer I've been working and meeting people, I don't know. I almost actually think it's better the way that you did it, because you get all this experience, you see what works and what doesn't work. And you're like, hey, there's a problem that we can solve here. Versus if you've never been in an organization where you get to see problems, I don't know. Again, there's a million ways to do it, but I don't know. I think some of the big innovations that are coming are going to come from people like you guys you've been in the weeds of it. You've been in the storm, and you're like, hey, this is a solution that we think we can go solve.
Yeah, well, I think it's how our brains work for Rifle and I too. Like, is we take in a lot of data across a lot of different areas, and then we continue to churn on it, and then over time we can envision a path. And I'd say I'm not necessarily a risk averse person, but I'm also not risk averse, if that makes sense, right? I'm risk cognizant. So I think Rifle's the same way. And so like the more data we've been able to gather over time, the better we're able to manage that level of risk tolerance to get into where we are now, where like we felt both enough passion and excitement about the idea of Integral, but also had lived long enough and taken in enough data to know that, yeah, there's risk for sure. And you can never eliminate that, but we feel a lot better about how to manage it and work with it than maybe even 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's just us.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The first question that I wanted to really start with for you guys is, so you've obviously, like we said, you've been in industry, you've done lots of different roles, both of you. It's impressive looking at both, your LinkedIn history of what you guys have both achieved and done. Do you guys remember, first of all, day one of whoever started the conversation with the other one of, hey, we should go start something? You probably didn't know what it was going to be called, but at the time, like, do you guys remember that first conversation? And could you kind of like allude to everybody kind of where this idea of the spark came from, and where Glenn and Rifle kicked off the first conversation of like, hey, we should start our own thing?
Yeah, let me field that one, because it's almost like evasive, but there isn't a bing bang moment. It's one of those, like the boiling of the frog sort of cliche or analogy. And you touched on this before, Shane, that I think one of the things that we're finding comfortable is that with our experience and our paths of careers, starting something now versus like if I had been in my 20s and started, I was even more stupid than I am continue to be today, right? Like, you just learn so much, and you have a network of people, and you have experience, and you've got a lot of scar tissue from the failures that you've had, that it's just all of that knowledge base. I think it actually goes back to really the starting of a friendship, and the Friday, what was it, March 19th or something, the day the world stopped. Glenn and I had met a couple months before, and we had set up some time to get together to get to know each other. We went out for dinner with our wives on that Friday before everything shut down. And then, we happened to bubble up through the pandemic. So there was just so much bonding in that. And then in doing the work, that slowly this, not just personal friendship, but business friendship founded, where we just saw so many things commonly and together, a high amount of overlap. And it just doesn't happen at one point, right? It just it takes time, almost in the way, other relationships build and build and build. So Yeah, not a key point. It was more of, I think once we started to turn into something real was we had done a lot of what we're intending to do now at approach and philosophy level in previous roles, and certainly at JPG. There was, yeah, that we did start to last year say, you know what? If we could start fresh with our own team, clean slate, build it from the ground up, imagine what it could be if it was purpose built. And so that's to get back to your question, there's probably something last summer, last fall, where things started to be more of a hypothesis, less on a, hey, let's go do this thing.
Okay. And that's how it always has to start, right? And so, okay, so you guys have this kind of bubbling up. It seems like it's something that similar to, honestly, probably, me and Kyle's story, where you kind of have these conversations that just, you keep getting excited about them. They keep happening. And over time, it builds into something. Was there a jumping point where you both kind of at one point meeting and talking and were like, all right, let's throw in the cards. Let's do this. Do you guys remember that?
I was more the holdout. So Rifle deserves credit for kind of having more of the original inspiration and saying, what if, right? What if? And all credit to so many of our team members at JPG who we dragged along and made them do uncomfortable things. And so many of them did it, right? And trusted in us to do it, to help further some of the hypotheses we had even come into JPG with. So we'll always be grateful for those folks, for their trust and their willingness to take a leap. But there was a little bit also of that, the difference between retrofitting versus something being purpose built. And so Rifle kind of made that observation originally, and I was like, I don't know if that's what if I were to leave JPG, I don't know if that's what I want to leave it for. And then we kept talking about it, and just a number of things kind of coalesced over kind of a 6-month period, or in my personal life, but also in the business world, including with a lot of my friends and some of the experiences they were having in the food industry with some other companies, that got me to a place where the calculus made a lot more sense, and the excitement of around the notion of it was always there, but like some of the inhibitors, if you will, were lessened, were eliminated. And it was probably, around the holidays where we had a little bit of time to sit down outside of the rush of work and talk about it in a more structured manner, where it's like, all right, you got me. Like, you won me over. I think there might be something worth considering here. And started to talk about it in, more probably structured terms as the calendar year began to unfold. But yeah, so like it definitely was a process. There are a couple of hinge points in there, the holidays being one of them, that enabled us to get to where we are now. And then obviously making the decision and having the communication with JPG about a month and a half ago, obviously a major hinge point, because at that point it gets very real.
Yeah, it does, right? As I say, especially when you're like, I'm putting my 2 weeks in or whatever the timeline is, and you're like, we're jumping to this. Did you guys, you map this out, you build this out, you have a concept. Obviously, I know roughly what you guys are kind of like, how the framework and the concept is today, but for just the average listener who maybe isn't as deep into CPG as the three of us are, would you mind kind of explaining to just the average Joe who's listening to the podcast today of like, specifically, like, what is the firm setting out to really do?
Sure. I mean, I'll take the first half about kind of the world we're trying to play in and why it's important, and then Rifle can talk about maybe the problems that beget our approach and why we think it's necessary, basically, and how it's different. Our kind of quick sentence summary is that we founded Integral to help food and beverage brands unlock better growth through what we refer to as ambitious innovation. So everyone's more or less probably familiar with what innovation is, maybe less so with kind of what we refer to as ambitious innovation. And so what we mean by that, and it's not a new idea. The term of having ambition and innovation has been something that's been used for well over a decade. You can go back to HBR articles and other things where it's been talked about, and there's even kind of frameworks that have been put out there that we've come across during our experiences and lived, through our various roles. What it says is, most companies, once they start and have a little bit of success, they develop a core, right? The core is kind of what you get known for. It's what gets you going. And you innovate first, usually, within that core. We were with RX Bar, right? So the core of RX Bar was the bar. And while we were in the early days, there was a lot of innovation around the bar itself in terms of new flavors in terms of how we talked about it, obviously how we went to market with it, and even, something a little bit around packaging and pack sizes, right? So that's what companies do in the early days to grow, is they innovate around that core. And the reason is that that's efficient. You've already got a knowledge base there, and you don't need to change as much to get the returns in terms of growth. The problem is eventually that starts to peter out a bit or slow down.
Sure.
And so companies that have greater growth ambitions, they won't be able to maintain achieving those strictly through working in the core after a period of time. So they have to move outside of it, right? And there are degrees to which you can move outside of it. And there's different terminology out there, but in the one framework that, refers to ambition the most, talks about the next rung out is called breakthrough. And then after that is transformative. Transformative is really, really rare, as the name probably implies, right? You are transforming the way a space works. And that doesn't happen that often, and it's hard to pull that off. Breakthrough is more in the middle, and kind of in some ways is both an outward and inward facing nomenclature, in that it's kind of breakthrough in terms of you are now planting a new flag for yourselves. You're doing something meaningfully different. And hopefully in your execution of it, it will feel meaningfully different to the outside world as well. That's always the intent, right?
Can I ask, Glenn, would any of the innovations that we were a part of at our X-Bar, would that fall through as breakthrough? Would you call that? Like, would you say like oats or nut butter, or is that still like real close to the bar? I'm just curious from the
RX bar perspective, things like nut butters and oats would probably fall into breakthrough, right? Because like they're going through the same channels largely, but entirely different supply chains and partners and formulations, and even kind of actually with oats, right? Different positioning or need or job from the consumer standpoint we were trying to address. So I'd say that those definitely move outside of core. It's always a little fuzzy, right? Like that,
Sure.
There's a bit of art and science in all of this, but I'm sure some folks that may listen to this podcast will take issue with how we're going to simplify and classify some of this stuff. But speed up the story here. As you move away from the core, your ambition increases, right? You are trying to do more and more different. And that has two major implications. One, it's going to be harder. You're answering questions you're not used to answering. You're having to think about things you're not used to thinking about, and you're having to do all that in ways you're not used to doing. Two, in order to best serve the consumer job or need that it is you're attempting to address through this effort, you've got to open up the aperture of your thinking to not just be about the product, but rather the expansion of your business. So like, yes, the product is central to a lot of that, but everything that kind of surrounds a product and makes it a sustainable business, the further you're trying to go out, the more of that thinking needs to be involved. What we've seen through our careers prior to JPG and at JPG is that is where the process for most companies falls down when it comes to ambitious innovation. And ambitious basically means anything outside the core, right? When the ambition starts to increase, is that they largely apply the same approach that they take to their core innovation processes and then try to tackle ambitious innovation that way. And it has a gap in that it's, right, we'll get this in a second, it's incomplete. It's not thinking about enough things, which leads to all kinds of problems. So that's a not so short explanation of like,
no, I love that. Yeah.
Ambitious innovation and kind of why we think it's important and why it's also challenging. And then Rifle can speak, to kind of the three common flaws we see in the approaches and how what we do tries to solve it.
Yeah, so Glenn alluded to, this is all born out of observation that we've seen in our careers, and then certainly a lot of research and analysis of best practices and how things work. And so we've been able to see a lot of patterns of success and a lot of patterns of failure, and you put all that together, and that's where trends tend to bubble up. And sort of the number one thing, the shortcoming that Glenn alluded to, when you're moving outside the core, you're moving towards something more ambitious, is sort of trying to do things the same way that you do inside of the core. When you're innovating in the core, it's largely the organization itself is largely the same across it. You can make small changes in the product and it can be supported within that model. As you move out, that starts to break down. And as you move out, that's when organizations tend to turn to outside service providers for help, because they can do innovation for like line extensions and things like that themselves internally, because they tend to be pack size, flavor, that
Sure.
sort of stuff. Outside service providers, what we've seen is everybody runs the process roughly the same way. They bring different people and different technologies into it, but the common thread is that they are extremely focused on equating the future opportunity with the idea of the product. What product are we going to make? What flavor is it going to be? What form is it going to be? What ingredients might it have? They usually do really good consumer work to get there, sort of inspiration. Where is the opportunity in the market? They tend to have, when it goes well, they tend to have a good grasp of the brand. The issue is products don't exist in a vacuum. They're introduced by an organization that has many functions, many parts into an ecosystem, the market itself, that is complex and has many elements. And so the other approach is, the traditional approach tends to be, you spend 6 months, a year or something polishing the idea, largely from marketing based disciplines, to the point where you end up with this two-dimensional concept. It's, a form, some flavors, a visual, and maybe some packaging with some communication, maybe some pricing. And then you test it with consumers in a way that's arguably abstracted from how they actually make purchase decisions. And then you've done all this work, time and investment, and then it's like, okay, it's perfect, let's go. And then you go find your R&D guy. You go find the person at a co-man or an ingredients provider. It's like, help us make this. It's like, yeah, let's talk.
Got it.
The realities of bringing that to life are a challenge. Or you turn around to your broker and they're like, well, retailers, they're not interested in something like this. They're going this way. So
this all makes sense.
What we've seen is two flaws there. One is this over obsession that the product is the solution. And then two is this traditional sequential linear approach where you bring in other functions late in the game to help you manifest it. Like, that's where things tend to break down. So
sure,
and this is why I started even with my intro, is Glenn and I's careers. Like, we've sat in the middle of many, many teams, and we understand the implications of various roles and functions and how to make businesses grow and how to ensure that products succeed. So our brains naturally turn to, and had confirmation from this other research, that is, hey, ask about all the other functions right away. Start thinking about how you're going to execute from the very in ideation. Hey, this is a cool idea. How would we actually put it to work? Not that you're looking to solve it fully, but have some perspective and understanding of how the product would actually move to market given your organization. And keep that approach, that multidisciplinary vision, all the way through the process in some level, so that you're always thinking about all their angles. So we've got a couple of other key aspects of what we're doing, but that is, if I had to point to one, it's breaking this sequential approach and keeping the product as an important part of it, but bringing all the other functions, all the other components and disciplines of the business into that front end.
I love that. I mean, if you don't mind, I'd love to try to put it into a 2-liner that I heard and tell me if I'm totally wrong here. No, I'm just curious if I'm right here, because it's funny, Glenn and Rifle, I'm sure you heard this. What came to mind while you guys were explaining all this story, especially the end with Rifle, was TIG. Glenn reminded me a lot of that. And I wasn't super involved in the beginning, but I was at the end. And so for everyone listening, especially in an organization, my experience is mainly our X-Bar when it came to this, but that's, I would argue, a smaller organization probably versus even what you guys work with now, which could be enormous Fortune 500 companies. We spent so much time, and I say I did very little, but the broader internal team, Peter had a concept that, even at our old office, that was in 225. I remember seeing the early concepts, bringing Robert in, and there was just so much energy and time that went into something that then when it finally came to pitching it to retailers, to bringing it to market, a lot of things kind of splintered up. And I would actually argue, just even given our X-Bar example, I don't know if you think the product was the problem. I actually think it was we were doing so well with bars and other things that were big dollar figures and the focus for, what we needed to accomplish day in and day out, that I could assume for anyone listening, the innovation side can sometimes it's tough for two things. One, what you guys just described, which is it's so hard to bring something to market that's really a breakthrough, game-changing product when it comes to just the way people need to think, and it's just totally different. But also it's taking time and energy away from things that are already working in an organization. And me, as probably more of a junior person at our X-Bar at the time, I remember seeing that and being in meetings being like, we're not even really given this its fair share or time, because there's just so much resources. Like we should all be focusing on our RX bars for 10 more hours a day, not maybe getting distracted by TIG. So I could see that maybe too as just an opportunity for you guys. Cause I know I saw that firsthand of just how easy it is for you walk in and I'm a numbers guy. So I vividly remember a meeting still where we threw some numbers up on a board and they were just like, we should like end this meeting now. If this is like as big as this is going to be this year, like we should probably just keep focusing on something else. And again, it's not to, diminish anything of their perspective, but I remember seeing that, it's like we've spent a lot of time and energy and we're at the starting line and we're going to stop.
There's an inherent tension, right, within the existing org. That's one of them, right, which is the opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Of trying to pull fully internally to run a process for ambitious innovation. And then two, there's a behavioral change and mindset shift that's required. You have all these people who are trying to get good at doing a certain thing again and again to make it as efficient and productive as possible. And now you're saying, but now think completely differently about completely different stuff.
Right.
And the odds are most of them will not be able and willing to do that.
Sure.
Particularly when you add back in the other tension of, I still have all this other stuff to do. So that is a huge problem. And I think the other building on what Rifle was hitting on the whole multidisciplinary kind of lens that we bring to bear is it's not simply an expediency thing, and it's not simply a risk mitigation thing. We honestly believe and have seen that these other areas are drivers and contributors to the creative process of innovation. So you're basically screwing yourself over if you're not thinking about them early. They're not all going to be drivers every time.
Sure.
But the very exercise of working through what can they bring to the party? What can they do to make this opportunity bigger and better is massively valuable because one, it may unlock something, but two, even if it doesn't, the very intentionality of having gone through and thought about these different areas now sets up, it crystallizes the opportunity in a way that you won't have otherwise, right? And
sure.
So now the ability to really nail it and move it forward is much greater than if you had never thought about these at all, right? Or left them till later. So it's not just the risk mitigation. It's not just the expediency. It's like they have something to offer, and there's it makes us laugh. And some of the better insights and ideas that we've seen in this process in the last several years, take JPG for example, came from sources that people have long kind of dismissed in the innovation processes. They don't have creative thinking to offer. It's people in quality roles. It was people in ops roles. It was people in highly technical food development roles who came with great consumer perspectives. By the way, they are, right? They're human beings who eat food. Great market-based suggestions. So I don't know. Our thinking is there's a lot more that can be brought to the party in this process and needs to be if you're going to have the best chance of success. And so that's why we are also so passionate about kind of this multi-component, multidisciplinary approach.
Totally makes sense. And you guys, from what I'm hearing too, and again, just going back to my experience that I just told you, I could totally see how you guys coming into that room and just keeping everyone on the track and really kind of continuing to push could be such a value that, again, in the organizations that I've been in and we've tried to innovate, that's where to probably bring more people on who've maybe even been in similar organizations. Another piece of this that really rings true for me as I'm thinking about it live here is how many times in bigger organizations, the organization wants to innovate. So I'll give another example of, I've been in a role where, the organization was banking on this innovation or this brand. But then they're relying on all the folks who are downstream, managers, directors, even analysts, to do the actual work to keep the project moving.
Yep.
And their only real connection point was to hear okay, so it's been another month. Where are we with this and this and this? And I remember being in some of those meetings and being like, wait, do I have the keys? I thought that you had the keys. I've just been putting all this data together. And so now what do we do? And we've been waiting for 2 weeks for this meeting. So I totally get what you guys are trying to solve. Do you think the next part of my question was coming into this? So I think that was actually a light bulb for me, because now I'm thinking of, even as a younger guy, a couple of organizations I've been in where this would have been so helpful and important. Are you guys more focused on that, where it's, it's maybe a more structured organization that has innovation that's trying to come through? Or do you guys also feel like there's opportunity, even with a new brand or a new product or a brand new concept? Because in my mind, and Glenn knows this, that's probably more of what I work with now, are brands that are launching maybe their first product, or they have their first idea that they're going to try to launch on Amazon or somewhere. Do you guys specialize in one or the other, or both? Or I was just curious from like what level is important for you guys before you really jump in with any type of like breakthrough innovation?
Yeah, our value is if you go back to what Glenn was saying 10 minutes or so ago, is you've got that core and now you're looking for growth outside of the core. Because if you think about a new brand, they're already doing this multi-model innovation. Yeah, they kind of came to the idea of the product, but they're building everything new, right? And so they're already in the mode. Can we help there? Yes, we can. Are we bringing, a game-changing focus to the table? Less so, because they're just living and breathing and doing that founder journey. So we can find ways to add value and scale across the entire industry. We're best suited to bring focus and expertise to established brands. So somebody that already has that portfolio up to, yes, the biggest of the big.
Got it. Okay. Totally makes sense. For both of you, I'm sure in the past you have similar experiences to what I said. I mean, it only makes sense for you guys to come up with this idea. When you guys decided to set out to start Integral CPG, I'm assuming you guys probably both have like brands or concepts you like dream to work with. And you don't have to share specifics here, but I'd just be curious, you guys both as, very experienced individuals, I'd love to know, even if you can tease any of us listening today, of just like the types of products or the types of even general brands that you may be trying to really work with. I think for the listener, it'd be cool to hear like even like a tangible example that doesn't have to be specific, but just like a tangible example of things you guys might be working.
Sure. I mean, well, one, I think we can speak to, and I'll try to speak it in high level terms because it's still unfolding and I don't want to violate any confidences, but I was lucky enough with some folks at JPG to work with Kraft Heinz on the development of the remix machine, which is basically, it's I hate to use this analogy.
You told me this at coffee. Yeah. I can't wait for you to explain this to the audience. It's so cool.
I think the easiest way for most people to understand it, and apologies to my friends at Kraft Heinz for having to continue to make this analogy, for what Coca-Cola Freestyle machine is for fountain beverages, Heinz Remix is for condiments, right? So it allows you to customize condiment combinations on demand, pick a restaurant, right? A Five Guys, right now BurgerFi, which is where it's rolling out across the country to start. And that is a perfect example of something that is pushing past breakthrough towards transformative. I would argue will be transformative for the fast food and just broader restaurant industry. But you can't just think about, even defining what the product is in that case is really kind of fuzzy, right? Is it the stuff that comes out of the machine? Is it just the machine? Is it both? Is it, it's way more, right? Like, so the ability to work with a multifaceted team internally and externally there, deploy, we all were deploying, right? Like this, and sharing this kind of mindset of the success of this effort is not just about any one of those components. It's about thinking about the interplay of all those components. Think about even what you need to be able to do with the operators themselves, how it gets serviced, deployed, pricing, how they restock, training. Like that is a perfect example of like everything has to be thought about in concert. And so there's a real importance and skill required for the folks kind of sitting at the middle of that, which we were lucky to just be a part of. Won't overclaim. There were plenty of other awesome people sitting at the middle of that, and particularly on the Kraft Heinz side. Keeping all of those, the analogy Rifle and I often use is that of an orchestra, right? Like playing conductor so that the various instruments know when they're not only supposed to be playing, but how loud, and to get to the general outcome that you want. So that one is like one of my favorite experiences, and obviously its journey is still going, right? It's just in the early stages of its rollout. And a lot of those components are still being sorted through, right? That's the beauty and the challenge of trying to do big things is, and another kind of one of our tenets is, core innovation. You think about like, there's a very finite, or at least people try to give a very finite finish line to them. We know this work, and we send it out, it's launched, and now we're on to the next thing. And that doesn't work as well. And for things like transformative and breakthrough innovation, and the remix machine is a great example, right? There is learning that is going to happen for the next many, many months into years. And that has to keep getting integrated into what the solution is. And if you don't, it will ultimately fail. So you have to think about even the way that you quote launch differently when you're doing this work, which is another kind of our big three philosophies for Integral. So that's a real world example of something that was an awesome experience to be a part of, and I think really validates our viewpoint through real world experience.
I love that. I remember when you told me that at coffee, I was light bulbs. I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. What a cool, innovative idea. I love that when you told me that live.
And it proved out, we had a large room of people from all kinds of different disciplines who were helping solve each other's problems, right? It was a very real world proof point of do not pigeonhole, do not stereotype different people of technical knowledges to assume they only have certain roles to play in the process. If you know how to bring them together, and you know how to set them up to work together and set them up for success, you can get amazing results. And that was a wonderful example of people contributing ideas from way outside like what their supposed domain was, that were hugely important to move the thing forward.
For sure. So for you guys, I love asking this type of question because you're so new. So it's going to be fun to fast forward a couple of years and see how it ages. For you both, do you have someone listening today who maybe, whether they've been in a role for a really long time and or they've been in corporate America for a long time, they've always dreamed of starting their own thing, or someone who's very young, either or, and it could be somewhere in between. Now that you guys have made the leap, you've made the announcement, you're actually driving your own business, you look back over the last couple of years, any advice that you would give to someone who's listening to their podcast at their desk today that's always wanted to do this but have just never pulled the trigger? Was there something special or a specific thing that you'd be like, hey, if I were you in your shoes a couple of years ago, this is something I wish I would have heard?
For me, it was, and probably some of this came through in earlier, but you're really finding a partner. One massive amount of good overlap so that we share, but then a healthy amount of complementary. Each of us have some independent areas that we're best at and can help the other. Lynn knows this. I've been kicking around the idea of trying to get a team of my own up and running for a while, and some of it goes back to sort of that risk profile that shared. I could never really get there myself. But then it was also, I think it was able to back away from just a position of like real hubris on like, I'm kind of weird. Am I going to be able to create a culture and a team that's a reflection of me? Is that a good thing? I don't know. Is it, now it's everything's on me. And so some people are just born to do it. They have the strength of the will, and they want all the control and be the person at the center and be the man, right?
Sure.
I don't know. I really honestly don't know how you get there, and it's just not the way I work. And having a partner for me, just like that was the moment when I was able to finally twist his arm to where it's just like everything lined up. Dominoes started to fall, like all the unlocks happen. And my guess is if somebody has those sorts of ideas and they just haven't been able to get there, it could be the same thing. You need the right partner that can then make it all line up and start to work.
Love that. And Glenn, what about you?
No, I completely agree with that. I mean, I tried, I don't know if Shane and we've ever even talked about this. I tried, but right before I came to RX Bar that previous summer, I thought about leaving and launching my own food brand.
I don't think I know this.
And did a little work, even some prototyping work with JPG, who I'd known for years. And as part of that, I decided ultimately not to, obviously. One of the reasons was what Rifle just said, is like, I don't think I can do this alone. And it wasn't necessarily a fear thing. It's more of a balance thing. You need a counterpoint. You're going to have an off day and you need someone to pick you up on those. You're going to have tendencies. You need someone to break you out of them or challenge. So I would, all of that to say, like, I lived exactly what the point Rifle was making, right? Tried it on my own, very much felt that wasn't going to work. And so having a co-founder, and I know you know this as well, is hugely important. I think the other maybe learning is, and it goes back to your question earlier, that at least for us, there wasn't the magical big bang moment where it just all makes sense and it's so clear that it's the thing to do. So I think for many people, if you're sitting around waiting for that sign, you may be sitting around for a while. I think what happens is you get to a point where your excitement and passion and belief in the ability to find a way through becomes greater than your concern about the potential barriers and risks of finding that way through, where you get to a point where you're like, I may not know exactly what the path is going to look like, but I know we'll find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay with the bumps that are going to come with that. And that's kind of, I think, where we got to, where that enabled us to make the final decision is, I've said to Rifle and to my wife, like, the only thing I can guarantee is that the way this goes will not be the way I went in thinking it's going to go, like not 100%, right? Like, it's just not. And you're doing yourself a disservice if you go in thinking you got it all planned out. You just don't. And so when you can get comfortable with that and almost embrace that, then you're ready. Or at least we were.
I love that. Both of those answers are fantastic. It is funny, there's definitely businesses out there where it's a single person that somehow does it. And I think the longer I learn about people like that, I'm thinking they're just, to Rifle's point, they're some sort of different breed that they just love that role, and they wake up thinking about it all the time. It does seem like way more businesses nowadays, and successful ones, they at least have two people who, I agree. I was talking about a yin and a yang, and to your point of like good days, bad days, just the ways you guys push each other in different directions at the same time. It just all pushes the momentum forward is the way I always think about it, right? It's like, you're going to have the swings in any type of business. And so it's like, I love this saying, I say it all the time, be consistently good versus occasionally great. And I think it's so true in entrepreneurship and business, because I have like this journal I use all the time. And, if I scroll through there, there's nothing, magical day to day. But then you like take a step back and you fill up a quarter and a couple months, and it turns into a year, and you start to realize like having a co-founder who you guys just keep brick by brick and just keep kind of grinding at it every day for a long period of time is actually what most businesses are built on, versus, like you said, this magical day that you were like, "Woo, epiphany, here we go, let's do it." So I love that. That kind of like validates what I believe today in most businesses is success. It's just slowly but surely.
It's boring maybe to some, but like great brands and great cultures are built on consistency.
Yeah.
Showing up the same way in multiple places all the time, right? Across different kinds of occasions. That is the foundation of being able to build either of those things well. And, a lot of attention gets paid to the isolated, brilliant moments. And as this should be, right? Brilliance is amazing and should be celebrated, but brilliant moments are only possible usually when there's a strong foundation for them to jump off of, right? And
sure.
So,
yeah.
It's less powerful and it's less valuable if they were a complete blip or anomaly versus the lightning in a bottle that came from having a strong foundation that will now be able to take that lightning and sustain it into something. So I'm curious. You asked us that question. What would your answer be? You're ahead of us. So
sorry, which question? The one about
what's your advice to somebody looking to start their own thing?
It's a great question. And honestly, I mean, not that I don't want to share it on the podcast. I have a little something that I've been working on in the background too. Kyle's involved too. I'll have to talk to you guys offline. I'd be curious just to like pick your brain on some stuff. My advice would be just to get started. And that sounds so cliche. I talk about it a lot on here. I use this thing called, and you can use whatever, you could use anything. That's, I think pen and paper is really powerful. I started using this thing called a full focus planner, and anyone that listens has probably heard me. I blabber about it too much, and they should probably sponsor the podcast, honestly. My advice would be, though, to just start and create a process like that. For me, I think what has always helped is doing a little bit for our business every single day. And it doesn't have to be, I think for the longest time, I always tried little entrepreneurship things, even like early honestly in college, all the way through my first 3 roles, and even at our X bar. And then finally, so this was like the 5th or 6th thing I tried, and it might not work forever, but I think the goal is like, you just keep trying. And it's the same thing once you do have the concept. Is I see so many people talk about like an idea they have, and I talk to so many founders on here now where they always had to like pass this hurdle, which is going from 0 to 1 is by far, in my opinion, the hardest part. It's like you have this idea, you feel like there's a billion things you have to do to get it off the ground, but the only thing that really matters is taking the first step. And that could be as simple as reaching out. If it's a product, it's, reach out to a few designers to figure out how the hell do I make a logo or a label, or grab the LLC, go to inc.com, file for an LLC, you're going to spend a couple $100. At least you have the business LLC done and you have like an EIN number. I think there's so many of all the way from like, I need a logo and I need to get like something created into a package to how the hell do I make an LLC? And do I need a CPA? Do I need QuickBooks? Do I need a lawyer? Do I need insurance? Like there's just, as someone who's brand new to anything like that, there's so much of that stuff that can feel very overwhelming. And my advice is just make a huge list and just try to do one thing a day. Try to do one thing a day. If you can do it for 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row, 5 days, all of a sudden then you get some momentum. And then you're like, okay, I'm making progress. I'm like moving towards something. And then honestly, part 2 of that advice is just to reach out to people like you guys. Like reach out to people in your network or you see on LinkedIn who obviously know way more than you and just try to have a conversation, right? Like go buy them a coffee and sit down for 30 minutes and pick their brain. More people are willing to share, I think, in this environment today than ever before. And so I think don't be scared to just go ask questions. Like ideas are awesome, but there's so many ideas out there. It's the execution that matters. And so few people I think are actually executing that it go ask the questions, but just start.
Great advice for innovation too, right? Everybody wants to like assume the only thing that can be successful is brand new. No one's done it before. It's like, well, a lot of the best things that come out every year are just better versions of stuff we already had. Like execution still wins. A lot of in almost every case. So, but yeah, your point about talking to other people who've done it, it's amazing the enthusiasm people have to support other people who are trying to build something of their own. Right.
Oh,
like
yeah.
There's just like nobody says no. Like everyone who we reached out to talked about their journey, not only said yes, but enthusiastically yes, and like gave us more of their time than you could ever expect, and will again. Right. Like there's just a passion for folks who've been through the journey to share with those who are looking to go on it.
For sure.
100% on the value of that. That was another key part, I think, of our journey and process.
Yeah. My quick build, Shane, on your I like you're talking about like there's those little successes, like if something hard, break it down into smaller things and you can build up. I think one thing that I'll claim that I think that we've done well so far, and maybe most don't think about this, is have the far out goal in mind. It's not like it's crystallized and, we're going to do this, but we have a vision for what Integral will be in 20 years.
Love that.
We have a plan for it. And by the way, it involves us being way in the background and others taking the charge and taking the lead and making space for others to come along. And so like without some sort of destination in mind, those little steps that you take can start to go in directions that are unintended too. So we know, Glenn said this earlier, the way the journey is going to happen is going to happen. It's not going to be like what we envision it. But if you don't have an end game and a destination in mind, you're not going to get there.
I love that. When I started using this full focus planner, ironically, a friend showed it to me, honestly, right around when COVID started. So it was just like ironic timing that a lot of things kind of all came together. And it's so true, Rifle. For me, and I was someone, actually, I mean, Glenn, even at our X Bar, I was very much this. There was, I always felt like I was a person who was reactive. So like my role for a long time, even at our X Bar, I had probably, out of anyone on my revenue management team at the time, I had more people that I indirectly supported than most other people on my team, I would argue. And so the inbound was constant. Like there was just, whether it was email, Slack, people coming to my desk. And so it was always, I was poor at deciding what was the priority. And I just was like whack-a-mole all day, every day. And at the end of a quarter, I would argue, I look at my counterparts now and I think like, man, they were just so much better at being like, well, this is what I really need to focus on. I have to like blur out the noise at an organization that's moving really fast. And for better or for worse, I probably like learned a lot from my counterparts by doing what I did, but I like was never good at driving in one direction. I was just trying to like appease a lot of voices. And now it's funny, like, again, I'm just flashing up the full focus planner. There's something to me about having...
hold it up.
I know, right? I should just like hold it up and share it for everyone to see.
You'll trip.
Something about like there's like annual goals in the front. There's 10 goals, and some of them are business, some of them are personal. It's something weird in my head that I open this every morning and I see them on paper.
Love that.
And then each week I have to pick a big 3. And then every day there's a big 3. And what that has done in my brain over the last 4+ years is just, there's 1,000 things I can pick from right the second to go do. but there's probably 3 that are like crucial to like take a step forward towards a goal.
Yes.
And so it helps you anything like that. And I think what you just described though, I'd argue like we could probably even get better at it is like where do we want 20 years from now? That's probably something I haven't like thought enough about. I have an idea, but that's not like a really like thoroughly written down, because that can then turn into, okay, this next 5 years, 10 years is what we should achieve, which is then what does this year need to achieve? I've done some of that for like my life, like personal side of things. Like I have kind of a, that's done and I build back, engineer that. But that's a great build rifle, because at the end of the day, like all of the, I heard a guy say this the other day on a podcast. I thought it was cool. He talked about, it was who was it? Not Mason Crosby, Alex, tight end, or the defensive end on the Raiders. Max Crosby.
Max Crosby, yeah.
Max Crosby. He was talking about how him and his trainer talk about microscope and telescope, and how once a week, once a month, you should look at the telescope. Like where do we want to go? But daily look at the microscope. And he was talking more about like fitness wearables and like specifically like what he's eating, how he's sleeping, how he's recovering, how he's like pushing fitness. But it was funny hearing him talk about it. I started thinking about business, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, holy cow, like we probably all could get better about that. How like, yeah, you should like every couple weeks, every week, whatever, look at the telescope. Like, where are we heading? Like, what's the big picture? But then like tangibly, what are you doing every day? Are you just getting distracted and responding to emails all day? Or are you actually like making progress and pushing the pedal forward on what your organization is trying to achieve and grow? I think there's a big delineation of being busy and being productive. And so, not to totally just beat this into the ground, but for anyone who wants to get off the ground, that's a big one. You can be really busy and not productive. They're really big differences, I'd argue.
Well, I think there's a misnomer sometimes too when people talk about envisioning a future and having longer term goals and plans, that like the people that end up successful like had these plans and then they just met them and it was exactly what they didn't.
Never.
Right?
Never.
Like, our 20-year vision is very fuzzy for a reason, right?
Sure.
And even the 10, 5, and in 1 year, the point of having them isn't that you're going to get exactly them. It's to know when you've decided not to, right? It's for the deviations to be intentional.
Yeah.
To know that you've changed course or objective. That's the value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's okay for it to change. It's not okay for it to change inadvertently without you being aware. That's when things go wrong.
Yes.
So you set these things in place to be aware, to do things with intention, right? Which is something that Rifle and I both are really passionate about, is like, it's okay to change, but change intentionally.
Yeah. I love that. And I think too, if you're not really focused on what we just talked about consistently enough, it's very easy to get to a time horizon that you were focused on and look back and be like, wait, what the hell? Why didn't we achieve what we felt like we were working on every day? Well,
I don't want this anymore.
If you go look at the micro and you're like, well, we probably spent such a little amount of our total time on what would have been the building blocks to get to that goal. So that's just been a revelation for me, honestly, over the last couple of years of really realizing, your time, your energy, what you put into it and where you're going, all that, it's all one thing. So get started. I know we're a little past time, so I want to be cognizant of your guys' time. One of the questions I love, as you're probably going to guess here because I just rambled about it, is, you guys now started your own business. So a new venture for you guys, a whole new world of trying to handle all sorts of things, like, as I kind of alluded to. What do you both use to do all this long-term planning? Are you guys, is this Excel? Is this an app? Is this pen and paper? All the way down to like, what does Rifle and Glenn use on a daily basis to achieve goals and get shit done? What are the tools that you two surround yourself with?
Long term, those things were born out of a couple of conversations. I think probably the first one starting in a coffee shop on like, hey, what do you want out of this to make sure that there was a mesh. So those are there and captured. And again, they're thematic. It's not like metrics. So, the goal is for us to be in the background and for this to be a sustainable business, and others are leading the charge and we're supporting and cheering them on. So like if we can't move in that direction, I don't know how it doesn't get there, but on day to day, I love the organization on the full focus planner. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. I can send you guys a link. They're great.
Yeah, getting into the mode of some of those things, because like you said, and even your experience, our to-do list is long. There are lots of things and sort of managing through priorities. Glenn's very great. He's organized. He captures a lot of info. That's less my personality style. So really, benefit again, of that partnership of having someone that does a lot of that. Like as a specific shout out on a tool, because listening back through some of your back catalog, that's a little bit of what comes out here. I think we've all dealt with CRMs in different roles of keeping up with contacts and what you're going to follow up with and tasks, and this is the size of the opportunity and what you're going to do. Used a couple of them. They're all like really big, overwrought, full of features. Like HubSpot comes to mind, where they're built to do everything. I don't remember how I ran across it, but there's this one made out of Australia, it's out of England, called Capsule CRM. It's stripped down. It's light. It's super basic. You got contacts and companies. You've got your tasks. You've got your opportunities you're tracking, and nothing else.
Cool. Okay.
If you want to bolt on some additional things. And so that's where I keep my tasks now every day. And I need to follow up with this person. And a lot of our, is still outreach to the industry in my network to say, hey, I did a thing. I've got a great partner. We should talk.
Yeah.
And it's just working through that, keeping me on task and making sure that I churn through some of those and that they don't get stale. But
I love it.
The theme there is like whatever tool works for you, and I like what you described. There's a simplicity in the ones that work, and you don't get lost in managing the tool.
Yes.
Versus actually it being useful for you. It's the reason why screwdrivers are awesome, and they don't have a bunch of switches and lights. And
that's such a good analogy. That's such a good analogy with the screwdriver. That's phenomenal. No, I love that rifle. I'll have to check that out. Capsule. Glenn, what about you?
Yeah, I think we're still finding not surprisingly, we're a few weeks in, we're finding our rhythm in terms of, like, we use a lot of different things right now, including the very high tech Post-it note. So to the micro of the microscope, right? This is every morning, like just the things I'm hoping on this, and then not even like the mega things, just the littler things necessarily that I want to get done in a day, but or that pop up that you just need to capture. Because I agree with you, Shane. I think and science shows that there's a better memorization when you physically write something down. So I try to always do physical writing down of things during the day. But then we also, a lot of OneNote with agendas, like meetings need agendas, to the point you had earlier. Like if you don't focus on what you wanted most importantly to get out of the 30 or 60 minutes, there's a good chance you won't get it. So go in knowing what that was and kind of be religious about maintaining that while, Rifle and I like to talk, as you might have picked up already. And so we have to be careful sometimes in meetings when we, get imaginative and deviate and want us to call everyone back. Okay, that's great. We got 15 minutes left and we have to get through this next thing. So let's get back on it. We use within teams kind of the tiles, for the name of the tool, for like the longer term stuff, like, 2, 3 month. And then eventually we will get into an annual kind of strategy and planning process. And again, I know a lot of people think of those as overly corporate. They get a bad rap. It's the same thing as like a CRM tool, right? They don't have to be what a lot of us lived through at mega, large corporations. It's the intent, right? It's the idea we're going to sit down and we're going to think about next year and what its role is in the big picture, 5-ish years. And then what has to happen within that year on a quarterly or monthly basis, roughly, for it to be a success within that 5-year window. And then we're going to write that down, and it's going to change, right? And when it does change, we're going to know it changed. We're going to know what that means. So we will have that process. That was something that both of us built at JPG. Again, it was Excel and, it was a combination of Excel, Outlook, OneNote, HubSpot, the whole there, suite, Capsule here, right? So it's like, I've not found a silver bullet that works for me. I'm glad you found maybe not a silver bullet, but something closer to that for you.
It's funny. I love that. I will say I've been trying to be as simplistic as possible. I'll give him a shout out because Glenn knows him too. We have a text thread where we just constantly share this stuff as me and Scavuzzo. It's so funny. Like he's got we like both just like ping pong back and forth. Like, I figured this out. Have you ever thought about doing this? Like it's actually a pretty funny text thread I should share. This has been great. I will tell you guys too. I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast. There's a very simple app. It reminded me of what Rifle said with Capsule. I love it because the team's out of Brooklyn. It's a few people that started it. It's an app called To Do, but they spell it TEUX and then DEUX. The reason I've loved it, and I honestly keep going back to it, is their whole concept was we want paper digitally. Like we want it to be as like paper as possible. And that's a great concept. But what I actually think is powerful with it, the one thing that like a planner or writing things out on paper really struggles with to me is reoccurring tasks.
Yeah.
So for me, like with some client things I have, like it's every week or every month that if I have to have it somewhere and then it has to like be there again. And I hate having to manage all of that. And so you can set it up to be as, you can every week, every day, every month, whatever it is, it'll automatically just be on your to-do list. And that for me has been a powerful, like that's become like my brain dump. And then I kind of organize that. And then my planner is more of like, okay, take all the noise in this like digital thing and just like, what has to happen today in this week. But I just share that because that app has been pretty cool for me. Again, just as kind of, it's almost like a digital warehouse for my brain, where if it was on paper, I'm sure I'd lose it, or my handwriting sucks anyway. So it's not the best place to organize big data sets of tasks. Well, cool guys. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. The last question I always like to ask, and the most important, obviously you guys, brand new business, just getting off the ground. For anyone listening today, which we hopefully will get a lot of this too, this happens on the podcast, is if someone's like, hey, I want to work with Integral CPG, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you guys and potentially work with you guys?
Take it, Rifle.
Yeah, just I'm the only rifle with a beard on LinkedIn. So,
also, you have the coolest name I've ever had on the podcast, Rifle. You win officially.
Yeah, so reach out there, email, because we still do that, rifle@integralcpg.com. We've got the genesis of a basic website up, so you can read a little bit about
Genesis of a basis. Is that
love
like
it.
Planning to plan?
I think that's where Kyle and I still are. Ours is still like a Shopify theme that I set up like one afternoon before an expo a couple of years ago. It's never changed. Okay, so website, email. I'll plug all this too for you guys. So
and obviously, I mean, Googling my name can lead you down some odd paths, but it'll generally find us some way. So
awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate the time. Really pumped for you both. Really excited what you guys are going to go out and achieve, and just happy to see you guys out there crushing it and trying something on your own. It's really cool to watch and see. So let's stay in touch. Thanks for the time, and we'll have to do it again. Maybe we'll do it in person next time.
Thank you so much for having us, and hopefully you can figure out your babysitting situation, and we'll see you in person in a few weeks.
That's right. Yeah. I know. Working on it. We might be able to pull it off. I'm excited. Hopefully we get to all hang out in person.
I'd love to have you. So
yeah, I would love to be there. Awesome, guys.
Thanks so much, Jay.